Hey everyone, thanks for checking out D&D Kinda. Before we jump into the story, I wanted to give you all a little background on what you were about to hear. When we first started playing, the intent was to just play. No podcast, no recording, just fun. I had spent hours crafting a totally unique Dungeons & Dragons campaign intro for these guys, and during that session, they really seemed to dig what I had cooked up. At the end of our first 10-hour session, it was unanimously decided that we wanted to record this, create a podcast, and share it with everyone. So here we are. I will say at the time we started recording, I may have been into D&D about 3 or 4 months, and some party members were actually brand new to it. So if we mess anything up, we break some of the rules, there is a reason that we called it D&D Kinda. Now, about that first session. There was a lot of information, and much like the beginning of any story, it's a lot of background and introductions. Unfortunately, we also didn't record our first session, so instead of presenting you all with a monotonous, boring intro episode that isn't fun to listen to because we've already actually played through it, we decided to do something a little different. Myself and the 13 Palm Trees production team worked extremely hard to present the opening story information and session content in a super amazing way that we think you will love, and we are so excited to present it to you. I will warn you, you won't hear any D20s being slung in the first episode, but I can promise you that we poured our blood, sweat, and tears into making this first episode into something truly unique to this type of real play experience. I know some people will want to hear dice being rolled and party members arguing immediately, so as a special gift, instead of waiting 2 weeks for the next episode, we're going to drop it next week. That way people can jump right back into the action. So thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoy the epic journey we have prepared for you. The team and I are so excited to present this labor of love, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy. It has been 400 years since the era of peace began. After the imprisonment of the god of death, Faerun has experienced centuries of prosperity and enlightenment. The inhabitants of the world have become more substantive and knowledgeable. There are still those who are loyal to their religion and the gods who empower their faith, but gods and mortals alike have taken solace and respite in the era of tranquil order. In the midst of this time of abundance, the flourishing capital city of Neverwinter bore no exception to the opulence the rest of the world has seen. Commerce thrived, and the population did all but go without, and it is here that our story begins. It's a quiet night in Neverwinter. The moon is high over the sky, and the town is hushed under the blanket of starlight. Entrenched in disparate and desolate pockets of night, there is a sagacious unease troubling the sleep of those in Neverwinter. A large dragonborn by the name of Bartholomew Dipsy is sitting in a dark room in the quiet of the night, rummaging over ancient scrolls. Out the window, the moon is showering the dark horizon with light. He averts his gaze away from the scrolls for a short time to rest his mind. He has been at this for what seems to be hours. Growing restless, Bartholomew stands up and does a light stretch. He hears a sound that is entirely foreign to him. It is almost a high-pitched singing mixed with a horrific scream, immensely sinister and truly unnerving. The noise reverberates in his ears nearly as loud as it does in his mind. He turns, swiftly paces to the window, and notices there's a large gap in the ambiance being cast from above. He sees it over the rooftops, as there's a shadowy gap in the moonlit sheet softly covering the village. Something hovering in front of the moon. It shrieks again, and a third time, and each time the sound grows louder. Moments ago, he was amongst the few who endured in the darkness, as the town slept in the silence of night, but the smallest of sounds can break the guise of tranquility. The town awakes beneath the screams of what they cannot see, a mere silhouette created by the shroud of moonlight. The screams multiply, as they are now mixed with the myriads of horror being experienced by the innocent and naive. Bartholomew's composure is unwavering, but his mind is racing. What could this be? The creature shrieks a fourth time, so loudly as the veils of normalcy are shattered. nearly as loudly as the lamps and inkwells surrounding him. His head throbs and his sight blurs as he cannot stand to be hearing this much longer. His hands clutch his ears tightly, creating a pressure that pains him greatly, but dampening the noise is all he can think about. He falls to his knees, and he can no longer see the town, nor can he hear it. He looks up, and in the pedestal of moonlight, it floats. This creature of malice. Benedict Blumpkinpatch is sitting on the grassy hills, gazing upon the setting sun. His skin is drinking in the rays of sunlight, steadying his breath. Benedict finds a calming peace in the dissipating horizon, one he has not felt in years. He turns away from the golden sun and begins to walk down the hillside. He lets the slant of the mountain carry his feet ever swifter. The momentum builds. Faster and faster he runs, and the ground curves slightly back uphill, and he leaps. His eyes close, and the wind carries him swiftly through the empty air. He feels the cold wind brush his cheeks, and he takes comfort in the sunlight's grasp. He falls faster and faster, and then he pierces the watery veil. Benedict rises to the surface of the lake as the sun creates a golden sheet atop the water. The ripples carry him slowly to the center of the lake, and as the sun slowly slips behind the mountain, the golden reflection lowers across the lake, like a sheet being pulled from a bed. The light waves in the water carry him to shore, and Benedict rises. The warmth of the sun washes over him, showering him in the last of the rays of warmth. He begins to move towards the horizon, and as he does, the sun stops. The air becomes cold. The sun turns red, blood red. It slips in the night sky and turns black. The air seems to evaporate as Benedict's breath is sucked from his lungs. He can't breathe. As the blackness spreads, just then, it opens to white. Gazing with malice, directly in the sky, a giant eyeball, filling with blood. He wakes, abruptly, gasping for air. The pleasantries fade quickly, and Benedict realized it is in the dead of night. It was a dream. He struggles to gather his thoughts as he is unable to piece together what feels like remnants of a fractured mind. He turns and sees his brother Hamilton sleeping in the cot on the other side of the room. His head falls back to his pillow, and as it does, he notices something in the boundaries of his sight. It moves. It moves again, and Benedict raises slowly, vertically, to investigate. There they stood. 3 creatures, not human, not even close. With silver eyes, they shifted and moved, but oddly in place. Sharp teeth protrude from the mouth of the middle as it towered over the other 2. Razor-sharp claws glistened in the light, and what Benedict could only assume as blood dripped from its fingertips. The other 2 screamed and turned and walked behind their leader, but they do not reappear. The leader pointed at Benedict, shrouded in the darkness concealed by the corner of the room. Its mouth opened and incoherent words flowed. And then silence. Its arm lowers. Benedict rushed to his feet and brandished his lantern to face his foe, but they were nowhere to be found. It is just Benedict, his brother, and the fluttering voice of an unnamed horror. Benedict turned, looking in every direction. He is alone. He is afraid. And worst of all, Benedict is awake. His hand spins as Christopher Dorian is swirling the remaining shards of ice in his glass. The brandy in his cup is becoming diluted, but he just can't bring himself to keep drinking. The silence around him is only in his head, but that is where Christopher is dwelling tonight, flushing out thoughts of his past and trying to ignore those around him. The silence breaks as the bartender asks for a last call. Christopher has no reaction. He simply stares ahead of him at the back of the chair across the table. People around him are gathering their belongings and filtering in and out the door. What seems to be hours pass as the brandy in his glass has become water. The blur in Christopher's vision is far compensated by the clear memories of his past, filling his head and thoughts far beyond the bounds of his current surroundings. His hand moistens as Christopher is snapped back to reality. The bartender wipes his table, and he tells Christopher that the bar is closed. He shakes off his thoughts as he pulls a few gold pieces from his pouch. He lays them on the table and apologizes for the delay. Christopher gathers what is his and heads for the door. As he swings to the door into the silent night, the streets are empty, and the only thing he sees is the reflection of the moon hitting what is left of the rain from the days past. Christopher hears nothing, and the rest of his senses are dulled from the brandy. He walks through the dirt streets in the night, heading back to his humble bungalow on the edges of town. The dirt turns to grass as the building density lessens, and he looked up to see his shelter in the distance. He approached, but as this happened, there is a deafening sound. Christopher dropped to his knees as the shrieking grew louder. His hands press against his head to shield his ears from the noise, but the pressure builds even quicker. Just as this happens, the air thins around him, and the heat builds. A gust of wind shoots by him, and then he sees it. Hovering in the air above him, a creature of darkness, obscured by the eclipse it created against the moon. It shrieks loudly, and its sharp-pointed features jaggedly spike above him. The only thing Christopher can see is the beating red eyes, as if the shadow was bleeding from above. As it shrieks, the creature drops from the sky, and Christopher's tenement is crushed beneath its wings and feet. Christopher, seeing this, brandishes his weapon and charges his foe. As he nears, Christopher swings wide right, but the creature catches him quickly with its tail, throwing Christopher against the tree, and then all he sees is black.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Bartholomew has a rough awakening in the center of his bedroom. He gathers his belongings and heads outside to the hustle of the town. Everyone seems on edge as he stumbles out the door. Bartholomew is already attuned to his worst realization. What he saw last night was not a dream. The crowds were all but screaming, and they seemed to be headed in one direction, all talking. What happened? What was that thing? Was anyone hurt? Who was responsible? Will the nobleman know what happened? They were all headed to the keep of the nobleman, the liege of Neverwinter. He was given charge to oversee all the important decisions, town disputes, and gray areas of the hazily defined laws of this great city. Surely he would have answers, they thought. But Bartholomew was not so sure. There was something about this situation that put him at a relative unease. The scrolls he was studying the night before were quite unclear, but his dragon intuitions could not let his mind escape from what he was attempting to comprehend. Darkness surrounded those scrolls, like a sickness, just waiting to be spread. Bartholomew blended into the crowd, clutching the holy symbol hanging from his chained necklace, whispering to his dragon god for guidance and insight. For even as the sun crested the mountain's peak, Bartholomew felt the day was growing darker. In the early hours of the morning, Hamilton Blumpkinpatch woke with relative ease. It was a quiet, peaceful night, and he hadn't had such rest in what seemed to be ages. He rubbed his eyes and his vision cleared, and he saw his brother, Benedict, who rarely awoke before him, sitting awake with his back to his cot, blankly staring into the floor.
Benedict, are you okay?
Hamilton inquired curiously.
I'm fine.
Benedict clamored, as he seemed to regain his sense, but just as quickly faded again.
You look pale. Have you slept, brother?
Hamilton re-engaged.
What? Yes, of course. Just a long night.
Hamilton paced for a moment, and just as his feet swiveled to turn around, his eyes caught a glimpse of the streets in the town. They're full of people, and as he notices them, the rest of his senses take over. The noise, the anguish, the horror. The looks on their faces are full of nervous fear. Hamilton knew this look. He was familiar with the scent of fear above all else. Hamilton turned and inquired as to if Benedict knew the occasion. Benedict rose to his feet and walked to the window. The brothers peered over the shifting crowd, and they could only hear fragments of what was being said.
Monster, beast, terror, death, fear. To the nobleman's keep.
Benedict caught on quickly and realized that what he saw last night may not have just happened to him. He grabbed his gear, as did Hamilton, as they rushed out the door. Hamilton, confused, questioned his brother as to the reason for the urgency, but Benedict kept walking into the streets. Into the crowd they blended, into the keep they followed. Christopher's eyes opened to the sun pulling the sheet of shadow away from his face. He shut them tightly and then slowly reopened them, adjusting and gathering his senses. His vision cleared as he saw the grass surrounding him, and he began to notice the taste of dirt on his lips, tainted with wet iron. Blood. He began to get up, and the pain hit him. As the jolt of stress shot through his back, causing him to fall on his hands, he remembered the night before, and why he was asleep on the ground. Remembering, his eyes shot left, and there he saw it. His tenement, crushed, and the scattered fragments of what belonged to him in pieces surrounding the rubble. He rose, dusted himself off, and began to comb through the debris. As Christopher was sweeping through what remained of his belongings, a small dwarvish woman approached him and took him quite by surprise.
Quite the morning for you, it seems, eh?
She spouted with a smirk. Christopher said nothing, as he found the comment to be out of taste. He turned away from her and returned to rummaging through the debris. He quickly forgot the woman was there as his mind was turned back to the events of the previous night. What was this creature? Why was it here? Why him? Christopher had only heard tales of such beasts, and certainly not in Neverwinter. Christopher's mind was snapped out of thought when he heard shuffling. He glanced over his shoulder, and he saw the woman running her fingers across the shining blue light emanating from his shield. With reflexes he knew not he had, Christopher spun on his bent leg, pounced over his bags, and landed directly on the dwarf, landing her flat on her back, with Christopher's mace raised above his head, ready to strike. The dwarf let out a surprised gasp, but it quickly faded into a smile, and then a laugh.
Mishkal. Not many of his servants left in today's age. Apologies, I mean you no harm. Your holy symbol resonates strong around you. I felt it as I passed.
Christopher lowered his mace slowly, and then slid off the dwarven woman and onto his feet, grimacing through the pain as the adrenaline disseminated.
Mishkal has given me all I have since the days I awoke. He has granted me a life anew. His loyal follower, I am.
As the last words left his lips, Christopher felt drawn to his shield, and the holy symbol emblazoned upon it, but quickly diverted his attention back to the dwarf. She squinted discerningly.
Powerful gods do become as their followers dwindle, but unstable. The followers of Mishkal I am not as familiar with. However, it is with plain sight. I can observe your worth to him.
Christopher, taken aback by what he has heard, stumbled over his words, but to no avail. He was conflicted. The dwarven woman stood, dusted herself off, and looked around.
Word is spreading of the evil that took hold in the night, and I gather that the folks are taking communion with the town nobleman as we speak, demanding an explanation, as if that half-wit could give it. If you want answers, you may find them there.
She pauses, and then looks directly at Christopher. She raises her head, tilts it slightly, and squinted her eyes again, and her entire demeanor changed.
Or you may end up finding yourself questioning everything you know.
With that, she turned, threw her cloak over her shoulder, and walked down the road, into the corner, and out of sight. Christopher, confused, turned his head, gathered his bag with the last of his belongings, threw his shield over his back, and began his journey into town. As Bartholomew neared the nobleman's keep, it was apparent that this panic was not just experienced by him, or even just his immediate neighborhood. Townsfolk from all directions were pouring around the keep, numbering in the thousands. Bartholomew, being of tremendous size and might, managed to squeeze his way through the crowds and come out nearing the front. There the keep stood, a massive ensemble of stone-cut ramparts and hallways, towering over the crowds, as if striking claim to the city, the capital building of Neverwinter. And still, for all of its glory, in this moment, it only acted as but a shore for the waves of people to crash down on. The townsfolk were screaming for an explanation, while the guards surrounded the keep entry staircase, shoving back the masses as they clashed against their shields. Bartholomew did not push, as he did not want to make himself known. Deep within, he thought there must be some connection to these ancient scrolls and the darkness that seemed to spew from them like a plague. He thought it best to remain in the crowds and wait, amongst the others, silent, but with his mind racing. Benedict and Hamilton neared the edge of the masses, arriving amidst the flowing crowd. Both being short in stature, dwarf and gnome, they managed to weave their way cleverly through the crowds, and as they approached the front, they did not advance with the others. Hamilton still was inquisitive as to what was happening, as he knew his brother had been unnerved. It was not often that Benedict was as troubled as he was. For the many years they have walked amongst the living, they have experienced horrors that few dare to dream of. So what could it be? Hamilton stayed quiet, and Benedict was pensively studying the crowd, waiting, absorbing all the information around him. There was an unease about this situation, one all too familiar with him. Christopher tailed the last of the masses as they gathered in the remaining spaces between the buildings surrounding the nobleman's keep. Christopher, being unable to tell what was going on, ducked in behind the crowd, skirted across the edge of the building to his back, climbed the gated wall leading to the keep, and now, towering over the crowds, walked along the raised pathway, giving him the vantage point, and allowing him to make it to the crowd's edge. Christopher leaped off the edge and caught himself on the wall's side with his hand, let go, and slid down to a lower rocky ledge. He stood higher than the others, but blended into the crowds more evenly. An unease took a hold of Christopher as he felt a sickness grow from within the crowd. The guard formation shifted, curving sharply around the basin of the stairwell. Shield to shield they stood, locked and ready for the crowd. There was a loud clang like the tightening of chains that shocked and silenced the air. Then a steady clinging, and the gates began to roll open. As the entryway widened, 4 large guards, clad in shining silver armor from head to toe, marched out, and between them stood the nobleman, elegantly dressed, with a deep blue sheen cloak flowing from his shoulders, originating from his breastplate. His armor glistened in the sunlight, and the emblem on his chest cast small white fractals of light across the faces in the crowd. Bartholomew could see it clear as day, the emblem of Neverwinter. This breastplate was handed down to the keeper of the city, as it is a brilliant sign of power and respect. A deep blue shield, chiseled in the center of the breastplate, with circles of pure ruby set in a triangular pattern within. In each of these circles rested the snowflakes of Neverwinter, trapped within their ruby prisons. The chestplate symbolizes the story of the ancient fire elementals that live deep under the Hotanau mountain, from which the great Neverwinter River flows. It is said that the elementals live to imbue the water with their magics, which causes the great river to never freeze and bring life and growth to all who drink from it. The great city of Neverwinter was named from this magic, and the story of its birth lives on in this eloquent sigil. The nobleman raised his right hand into the air. He flattened his palm and began to lower it, as if in attempt to quell the crowd. Christopher Dorian watched as the crowd was unresponsive to this. However, there was something else his keen perception lent way to. The nobleman seemed not hurried for an explanation of this riot, but he almost seemed nervous, or at an unease. Perhaps he was troubled by this great beast as well. Christopher pondered, and patiently waited. The nobleman yelled,
My good people, I am hearing many stories of horror in the night, beasts of which Neverwinter has seen not the likes of in centuries. I assure you what you have seen or heard was simply a prank, a clever scheme by a practicing warlock or sorcerer of sorts. There is no need for this mass panic.
Hamilton quickly began to connect the dots. He looked at his brother, Benedict, who with a clenched jaw and a tight grip on his scimitar, pensively stared at the nobleman from the edge of the crowd. Hamilton did not know his brother to be shaken lightly, and quickly assessed that something happened in the night. Whatever the nobleman was claiming was a farce had been seen by his brother, and whatever it was clearly sat familiar with him. The bodies of the crowd slammed against the shields of the guards as the nobleman spoke, and were repelled like water on rocks. The formation stood strong, bearing no weakness. Bartholomew stilled himself, as the masses around him moved forwards and backwards, like a steady wave. He reached to his neck, gripped his necklace, as he began to whisper a prayer to his dragon god. His senses steadied. He focused, and like a noxious odor it hit him. The smell of evil. As the masses clamored, Benedict stood, glaring at the nobleman, as if planning to strike. Hamilton took up arms next to him, smaller in stature, but equally as daunting. And then, Benedict saw it. The crowds had seemed to split slightly, and in an effort to compensate for the onslaught, the guards took a slanted position, splitting in the middle, leaving a wedged opening, just big enough for the dwarf and his half-brother Hamilton. Benedict readied his stance, and just as he put his right foot forward, something brushed past him that sent a chill through his spine. A hooded figure, bearing no impression of any sort. The figure stood at near the height and stature of Benedict, and it moved slowly towards the opening he had spotted. Benedict, not wanting his chance at the nobleman to be stolen, reached forward to grab the hooded figure, but Hamilton grabbed his arm and cautioned him against proceeding. Hamilton settled Benedict and urged him to watch what was about to transpire. With arms outstretched and covered in tattered cloth, the figure moved towards the break in the formation, and without quickening its pace, stepped over the legs of the guards, whom were nearly back to back, defending the stairway of the keep. And suddenly, a deafening sound, like thunder, a cannon blast from the roof of the keep. And then the nobleman spoke, as the crowds gathered their bearings.
My good people, have I never had what was best for Neverwinter at heart? This town is at the height of its prosperity, and even as the sun raises to its peak, so does our good city. Focus not on what you have thought you have seen in the night, but instead—
You there! Stop! A silver knight from the nobleman's side rushed down the staircase with his pike brandished, ready to strike. For in the center of the stairway, moving up towards the nobleman, was a hooded figure, short in stature, with arms outstretched, carrying something in front. The knight approached the figure, and as he did, he reached out and pulled the cloak from its head. It was a simple dwarven woman. She had brown hair that was matted together. Her cheeks were red and soaked with tears, and her eyes told a story of the likes that the guard had no interest in hearing. The guard pulled his spear back. Back to the crowd, or you will be—
That will be enough,
the nobleman interrupted.
This woman appears to be distressed. Neverwinter has been kind to us all, so who are we not to show this kindness in return?
The nobleman approached the stairs and he began to descend. The crowds were quelled for the moment and watched intently at this point. Bartholomew and Christopher included. As the nobleman approached the dwarven woman, he readied himself on the stair next to her and said,
Now, my fair lady, what brings you to my keep?
The dwarf raised her head and choked on her words, and she began to speak through her sadness.
My lord, if what we saw in the night was nothing more than a fool's errand, a prank, or simply a trick of the mind, then please explain this to me.
And at this moment, she curved her arm and lowered what she was carrying in both hands to one, and used the other hand to rip the tattered cloth from atop, revealing the body of a small child, mangled, nearly unrecognizable. The parts of the child's body were either displaced or entirely missing. The skin was torn in many places, as blood still poured from the body, and had soaked the rags that the woman wore. At this, the nobleman retched and turned, began to heave heavily, as he tripped over himself, attempting to climb the stairs. The dwarven woman fell to her knees, and almost with reverence laid the body of her broken, deceased child on the stairs. She then stood and turned, facing the crowd, who had already started to dissipate in horror. Christopher, seeing what had happened, sensed what was coming next, and began to run through the crowd, making his way towards the woman. Fighting the masses attempting to get away, Christopher was too late. Amidst the passing faces, he saw her on the stairs. Her hand reached behind her back, and slowly she brandished a large dagger. Christopher violently shoved his way through the crowd and reached the base of the stairs. He leaped the gap between the guards, and as he landed and looked up at the woman, he was too late. Christopher had arrived only to see the dagger dance with purpose over her neck, leaving a stream of trailing blood in its wake. She fell on her side, and the stairs jostled her down towards Christopher, who caught her in his arms, and he listened as the last of her breathing suffered through the fatal wound. Whatever was remaining of the crowd quickly began to disperse. The nobleman, covering his mouth in horror, rushed to the top of the stairs and disappeared behind the large iron door. Bartholomew, standing unmoved at what he saw, moved slowly towards the stairs. He noticed the human man who was still hunched over the body of the dwarven woman, speaking what he could only assume to be a sort of incoherent prayer over the woman's body. Bartholomew noticed the shimmering blue infinity symbol on the shield resting on the man's back, the symbol of Mishkal. He was a holy man, a man of the faith, a cleric. Bartholomew, being a paladin himself, extended an arm and placed it on Christopher's shoulder, and spoke.
My brother, your prayers will not go unheard. Let us seek her final resting place.
Christopher blinked, and again blinked, and then blinked again, quickly, as if he were lost in the moment.
Yes, thank you. The creature that did this to her child attacked me in the night. Or, I think, it destroyed my home. And now families suffer? This is evil we have not seen the likes of in ages.
Bartholomew replied,
Praises to your good health. Saw it, I did as well, in the moonlight.
A low, raspy voice spoke from beneath them.
As did I, only it was not in the moonlight. It was in my very home, in my quarters.
Bartholomew and Christopher turned quickly to see a dwarf, tall in stature, and a gnome standing next to him. The dwarf continued speaking.
My brother Hamilton and I traveled the world in search of the foulest of evil, stared death in its face, but I assure you, what was in the dead of the moonlight of the nights past was evil of which I have not seen.
As Benedict spoke, Hamilton connected the last of the pieces and spoke.
Brother, awaken me you should have. We could have fought them together, as we always do.
Benedict's face did not move. Pensive, he remained.
They were on us in our sleep. We live only because it is their will.
The thought of those words disgusted him. The four of them stood in silence for a moment, and then, moments later, the iron doors began to open again. A stream of guards carrying various bottles, cloths, and other items came streaming down the stairs.
By the order of the Liege of Neverwinter, relinquish the body of the woman.
Christopher, still holding the woman in his arms, stood, and Bartholomew, towering over the guards, stepped between them. The guard stopped, and with a look of severe intimidation, muttered, She is to be given a proper burial. In the graveyard by the monastery. Her child is to be buried with her. Please, we want no trouble." The rest of the guards reluctantly gripped their weapons. Christopher hung his head and looked at the empty, open eyes of the woman. Although lifeless, they still told a story of such suffering and loss. He moved around Bartholomew and extended his arms to the guard. They slowly and respectfully lifted the body from Christopher's arms into a burial cloth, and the child as well. They wrapped them with great care. They carried the bodies into the keep with the remaining supplies. As all four stood, they slipped behind the smash of the iron door.
"Well, Christopher, it looks like you found yourself a few friends."
Christopher turned quickly, and as he did, he saw a familiar sight. The dwarven lady from earlier that morning.
"How do you know my name?"
he inquired. He began to walk the stairs back down towards her. She was unmoved by this, nor did she appear frightened.
"This entire town was visited by a horrendous evil in the night, and I assure you that the horrors are only the beginning. There is reason and cause for all of you to be here, but I cannot speak of it in this place. Great evil plagues these grounds."
As she looked to the ground.
"Eyes and ears of the unseen. Can I convince you fine gentlemen to meet me later for a drink?"
She looked at Benedict. The four of them stood puzzled for a moment, and then Christopher spoke.
"Brandy's Main. Block down from the Swordsmith, Southern Neverwinter, after sundown. I will be there."
The dwarven woman looked around at the rest.
"Drinking? Count me in!"
Hamilton belted. A growl came from Bartholomew.
"Aye."
Benedict nodded.
"Brandy's Main it is."
The dwarven woman turned, and as she began to walk away, Christopher took a step towards her.
"Wait. How did you know—"
"Eyes and ears, my child,"
the woman belted, turned back to answer, and then with the most subtle movement, motioned her hand upwards towards the keep wall. Christopher followed with his eyes, and in the window, near the top of the keep, he briefly saw the nobleman before he slipped out of sight. Christopher looked back at the woman, but she was gone as well. He turned back and slowly approached Bartholomew, Benedict, and Hamilton.
"A reason and a cause," she said. "For us each,"
Christopher muttered.
"It would seem we all have commonality in what happened in the night,"
Bartholomew mentioned.
"This place, it fills my nose like a noxious odor. I cannot place it, but evil is here. The same evil I felt in the night during my studies."
Bartholomew shared what happened to him in the night, and the visceral beast he saw in the sky. Benedict shared of the inhumane creature that disturbed his dreams, and Christopher told them of the assault by the winged beast that nearly felled him. Bartholomew, pondering what he had just heard, spoke.
"My studies, I could not interpret all of what I was reading. Perhaps there was some significance to these writings. It is possible that I awoke these creatures with a spell that I released unknowingly."
The thought made him sick, for he could feel the evil in the night, growing as he delved deeper into his studies.
"Do you live near? I would like to see what it is you are referencing,"
Christopher added.
"And I,"
belted Benedict. And with this, Benedict, his brother, and Christopher followed Bartholomew back to his abode. The sun began to fall in the sky as noon broke. Bartholomew pushed open the door to his study, and the four of them came pouring into the room. Papers lay across the table, scattered with symbols that were unrecognizable to any of them. They each began to look at the papers, desperately attempting to decipher anything they could find.
"Ancient Draconic,"
Hamilton said softly as he rummaged through a stack of paper.
"I ran across this in my time training in Tamanthere."
Bartholomew objected.
"I know the likes of Dragonborn text. This writing predates Dragonborn history altogether."
"A strange dialect, of course,"
Hamilton continued.
"but Dragonborn nonetheless."
Bartholomew picked up the text and attempted a recollection of his early days of studying, but the text was foreign to him. He could not recall anything of discernible knowledge, maybe something of palm trees of the sort. If there was any knowledge to be gained from these scrolls and papers, then it would not be found at the hands of these four. Time passed and the sky darkened. Benedict stood gazing over the city top from Bartholomew's study window. The sound of the incomprehensible words uttered by the beast the night before were ringing in his ears.
Brother, let us go. I have a drink waiting on me at the Brandy's Main.
Hamilton was already on his way out the door as Benedict brushed off his thoughts and followed Bartholomew and Christopher out the door and on their way to the Brandy's Main. The sun was slipping behind the mountains to the west, creating enough light to carry the four companions through the streets and the end of the road holding the Brandy's Main. As the four of them approached the bar, Christopher noticed something out of place. 2 suits of armor, unoccupied, standing aside the entrance to the Brandy's Main on both sides. Christopher frequented this place, and this was a new addition. Not thinking anything of it, Hamilton passed Christopher and walked towards the door. The smell of fresh ale, jolly music, and laughter filled the air, and just as Hamilton pushed forward for the door, there was a stabbing pain in his shoulder. Hamilton blinked and slowly looked to his left. It was the hilt of a sword, with a large metal arm holding it tightly. The pain heightened as the hilt traveled further from his eyes, and the metallic red glow of his blood and steel blurred as his vision dissipated. Benedict, seeing his brother skewered at the end of the sword that rivaled his own height, brandished his scimitar, leaped through the air, and as he swung, was bashed in the side, hit the ground, and rolled across the dirt. He spat. Blood and dirt were splattered on the ground next to him. As his eyes raised, he saw his brother looking at his hands, covered in blood, with an empty look of defeat in his eyes. Christopher, holding his shield, grabbed Hamilton and pulled him back behind the shield, and all at once, Bartholomew rushed in and shoulder-checked the suit of armor, knocking it back. Bartholomew's mouth flailed open, and with a roar, he spewed a black acid cloud across the suit of armor. It began to corrode, and moments later, it lay empty, in pieces in the street. Christopher quickly turned back to the other suit of armor and threw his shield out, attempting to knock him back. But as he did, the armor ducked and kicked Christopher and Hamilton flat on the ground. The armor raised his sword, and as it fell towards Christopher's head, Christopher pulled the shield atop him, painfully absorbing the brunt of the blow. And as the armor lifted its sword from the shield, there was a flash, and Benedict speared the armor's side, knocking him flat on the ground. He sunk his scimitar deep into the chest of the armor, but it appeared to do nothing. The armor shook and began to lift, and just as Benedict began to roll off left, there was a shadow that covered him, and then a loud crunch. Bartholomew's mighty foot crushed the helm of the armor. Lifeless, it lay. Christopher turned to Hamilton in an instant, outstretched his hand, and began to pray.
Hamilton, you oaf! Blinded by your love for brandy!
Benedict shouted as he looked at Hamilton's wound. There was a bright light, and at the hands of Christopher, Hamilton's wounds began to mend, and the blood stopped pouring. Hamilton was healed with not even a scar. He stood, looked at his brother, and said,
"And if I didn't have a reason to drink, I do now."
The group poured slowly into the bar and took their table. Not seeing the dwarven woman, the group ordered drinks in the time of their wait. Hamilton, at the bar ordering his drink, dipped his hand into his pouch to grab a few copper pieces to pay for his ale. As his finger combed his coins, a smile worked his way over his face.
"Bartender,"
Hamilton smirked.
"I think that drinks are on the house for everyone in the bar."
Hamilton's other hand was on his quarterstaff, and for a brief moment the bartender, a slender elven man, stared at him as if he were contesting his statement. Moments passed, but Hamilton remained firm, and he raised his glass and took a drink. The bartender squinted his eyes, and then a smile shot over his face, as if he were suddenly charmed.
"A stressful day it has been by all in Neverwinter. Drinks are on the house."
Hamilton smiled as he slipped his quarterstaff back into his belt and began to turn around. As he was turning, he suddenly stopped, looked back at the bartender.
"I reckon that you won't be needing that coin bank, seeing as how all the drinks are free."
The bartender, charmed, smiled and agreed as he handed Hamilton all the money the bar had made that night. Hamilton swiped the box from the hands of the bartender, shot him a wink, and then walked back to the table. He dumped the money out, and the party divided it amongst themselves. Christopher struggled for a bit, but ultimately decided that he committed no crime by taking money that was handed to him for free. The four raised their glasses and toasted to good health, and just as the glasses touched, the air went still. The sound stopped. There was no laughing, no dancing, Not a movement. Time was frozen, except for the four of them. As they looked around, attempting to comprehend, they heard the bar door swing open, and in walked the dwarven lady. She made her way across the bar table and sat in the chair next to Christopher. The four of them stared at her, appalled and shocked by what was happening. They had never witnessed such magic. The lady made herself comfortable next to Christopher.
Francis is my name, and I will be brief, for magic of this magnitude is all but sustainable.
She struggled for her breath.
You have all been visited in the night by a terror in some form or another, and it is for the same reason I was able to place you in the crowds this morning, and why you all met each other in the fashion you have. You are bound in blood.
She threw out her hand, and in the center of the table there was a glowing red light that slowly lifted from between their glasses. A red skull, with 9 droplets of blood dancing around it. Hamilton knew this sigil from his time studying the deities of old. This was the symbol of the ancient god, Baal, the lord of murder, god of evil. Baal was only known from his defeat in today's age, and what he was capable of had passed out of all knowledge, except by those who study the ways of the ancient deities. Hamilton shuddered, and a chill shot down his spine.
Baal is returning. His agents of darkness have begun to scour the earth for the bearers of the ancient seals that banished him, for they must be destroyed if he wishes to return. If you have been visited, then whatever the reason may be, you are a part of this, whether you like it or not. I spent days searching for the child of the dwarven woman, but the creatures found him first. That child was the last blood of the demigoddess Selene, demigoddess of the outcasts. Her blood was spewed centuries ago on Damara Plains during the great battle of the Last Age, but in her final act, she created the first of the 9 seals to imprison Baal. The last of her blood now lay in pieces of an unworthy grave.
Christopher's stomach turned at the thought of this. His mind was racing, as he had so many questions, but no way to verbalize them.
As the 9 seals were crafted, so his power diminished. And on the final day of the Last Age, gods and man alike suffered a terrible blow, for Baal did not succeed without sending many to the afterlife. His servants have hid in the shadows for hundreds of years, and now the seals are weakening as they begin to break. One by one, his servants hunt for them, and as they break, more of his evil will be released on this world.
She stops, and the skull disappears from the center of the table. She looks around, studying the faces of the four.
For whatever reason you have been chosen, Baal cannot be let free, for his wrath would see the world's end.
Bartholomew sat staring at Francis, while his mind filled with questions about his studies. There were so many things he could not piece together. Why did he feel at such unease? Bartholomew recalled his past, and all the sins he had committed, and all the horrible things he had done, and the atonement he sought.
Many sins I have committed in my past. If it is to be decided that this is how my penance must be paid, so be it.
Francis laughed.
Oh, my friend.
She stopped and smirked.
Bravery such as yours is an uncommon sight, but the likes of this evil
She glared at Benedict.
you have never seen.
It was silent for a moment, as time was still frozen around them. Francis stood to her feet and then began walking to the door.
Dragon, follow your divine sense. It will serve you well. The nobleman will have answers for you.
And with that, she lifted her hand, snapped her fingers, and the bar came back to life around them. She was gone. There, in the center of Brandy's mane, stood 4 souls, all mystified, all distraught, and all unprepared for what appeared to be their fated divine entanglement. This podcast has been brought to you by 13 Palm Trees Podcast Productions. Check us out online at 13palmtrees.com.